It's strange how you can miss the warning signs until they hit you all at once. Looking back, I should have seen it sooner. Mia and I had been married for 6 years, and in the beginning, everything felt like a dream. She had this magnetic energy about her, drawing people in with her charm and quick wit. I felt lucky, like I'd found someone truly special. But over time, little things began to creep in, small, easy-to-ignore cracks that I dismissed because I loved her. Her phone, for example. She never let it out of her sight. At first, I thought nothing of it. Everyone's attached to their phones these days, right? But Mia took it to an extreme. She'd take it with her to the bathroom, sleep with it under her pillow, and always keep it face down on the table during meals. I remember one night when we were sitting on the couch watching TV. Her phone buzzed, and I glanced over at the screen out of habit. She caught me looking and pulled it away quickly, her expression sharp. "What's with the snooping?" she asked, her tone defensive. I was taken aback. "I wasn't snooping," I said. "It just lit up." She rolled her eyes and muttered something about how I needed to trust her. Then she flipped it on me, saying, "You know what? Let me see your phone. Let's see if you're as open as you expect me to be." Her challenge caught me off guard. I handed her my phone without hesitation because I had nothing to hide. She scrolled through it for a few minutes, then tossed it back to me. "See? I don't know why you're always so suspicious." The thing is, I wasn't suspicious. Not yet. But her reaction planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Her work hours were the next thing that started to feel off. Mia worked in marketing, and she'd always had a demanding job. Late nights weren't unusual, but they became more frequent. She'd send me a text at 9 or 10 p.m., saying she was stuck at the office or dealing with a last-minute client emergency. At first, I believed her without question. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, and I trusted her. But there was a night that stuck with me. She came home late, saying she'd been at the office, but her hair was damp, and her shirt had a faint wrinkle, like it had been hastily put back on. When I asked her about it, she laughed and said she'd spilled coffee on herself and rinsed her hair out in the office bathroom. I wanted to believe her, but something about the way she avoided eye contact made my stomach twist. The distance between us started to grow, slowly but steadily. She was more guarded, more irritable. The woman who used to hold my hand at dinner and ask about my day now seemed distracted and disinterested. I chalked it up to stress. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. As time passed, the distance between Mia and me became harder to ignore. It wasn't just her phone or her late nights at work anymore. It was the way she seemed to pull back emotionally. She stopped laughing at my jokes, the ones that used to make her double over in stitches. She'd brush off my attempts to talk about our plans or share little moments from my day. Even her family noticed the shift. At a barbecue at her parents' house, her dad made a comment about how she seemed more busy than usual. Mia waved him off with a smile, saying work was just crazy, but I caught the look her mom gave me, a silent question I didn't have the answer to. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that it was just a phase, something we'd work through. Every marriage had its ups and downs, right? But the doubts kept creeping in, little whispers in the back of my mind. One night, I decided to surprise her with dinner. She'd been working late a lot, so I figured I'd pick up her favorite Thai food and bring it to her office. When I got there, the place was dark. Not a single car in the lot. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty parking lot, my mind racing. When she came home later that night, I asked how work had gone. She smiled and said it had been exhausting, mentioning how her boss was putting too much on her plate. I didn't say anything about going to her office. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But it wasn't just her late nights. She became increasingly secretive about her laptop. Mia used to work on it at the kitchen table or while we watched TV, but now she always seemed to take it to the bedroom or her office upstairs. Once, I walked in without knocking, and she quickly shut the screen. "Can I have some privacy?" she snapped, her tone sharp. "Sorry," I said, backing out of the room. "Didn't know you were working on something important." "It's just work," she said, softer this time. "I don't need you hovering over me." Her defensiveness was like a slap in the face. I'd never felt like I had to hover over her before, but now it seemed like every time I tried to get close, she pushed me further away. I started noticing other things too. Small inconsistencies that didn't add up. A charge on our credit card for a hotel stay she claimed was for a work conference, even though I didn't remember her mentioning it. A faint trace of cologne on her jacket one night when she came home late, which she brushed off as a coworker's overly enthusiastic handshake. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was overthinking things. But the doubt was growing, and it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. The unraveling started with a single piece of paper. I was cleaning up the bedroom one afternoon while Mia was at work. Her gym bag was slouched against the closet door, half-zipped, and I decided to tuck it away. As I picked it up, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor. It was a receipt, crumpled but still readable. My eyes scanned it without thinking, and then my stomach sank. It was for a hotel just outside of town, dated 2 weeks ago, the same night she told me she was working late on a big campaign. I stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was for work, or maybe she'd booked it for someone else. But even as those possibilities crossed my mind, my gut told me otherwise. That night, I couldn't stop myself from asking her about it. We were sitting at the table, eating dinner in near silence like we often did these days. I pulled the receipt from my pocket and placed it between us. "What's this?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Mia's eyes flicked to the receipt, and for a brief moment, I saw something flash across her face. Panic, maybe, or guilt. But she recovered quickly, picking it up and giving it a cursory glance. "It's a receipt," she said, her tone light, almost dismissive. "Why are you showing me this?" "It's from the night you said you were working late," I said carefully. She let out a short laugh. "Alex, it's not what you think. I booked it for a client. They needed a last-minute space for a meeting, and the office conference room wasn't available." Her explanation was smooth, almost rehearsed. But something about the way she avoided my gaze made my chest tighten. "Why didn't you mention it?" I pressed. "It didn't seem important," she said with a shrug. Then she stood, clearing her plate from the table. "Honestly, I can't believe you're making such a big deal out of this. You really need to work on your trust issues." Her deflection was flawless. She turned the conversation around so fast, I barely knew what hit me. By the time she left the room, I was second-guessing myself again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. A week later, the doubts that had been simmering finally boiled over. Mia had left her laptop on the counter while she ran upstairs to grab something. It was unlocked, the screen glowing faintly. I knew I shouldn't look. Snooping wasn't who I was, and I didn't want to be that guy, the husband who didn't trust his wife. But the receipt, the late nights, the cologne, it all added up to something I couldn't ignore anymore. My hands were shaking as I opened her email. There wasn't anything suspicious at first, just the usual work correspondence. But then I noticed a folder buried deep in her files. It was labeled with a random string of numbers, something innocuous enough that most people wouldn't think twice about it. When I opened it, my world fell apart. There were photos. Dozens of them. Mia with another man, laughing, holding hands, their faces close in ways that left no room for doubt. And then there were the messages. Thread after thread of conversations between her and someone named C. Some of them were flirty, others explicit, and all of them were like daggers to my chest. One message in particular stood out. "Last night was amazing. I can't wait for the next time." The timestamps went back years, dating as far back as when we were engaged. I slammed the laptop shut and stumbled back, my heart pounding. The betrayal wasn't just recent, it had been woven into the fabric of our relationship for years, hidden behind her charm and deflections. When Mia came back downstairs, she smiled at me like nothing had happened, like my world hadn't just been turned upside down. I couldn't even look at her. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping her laptop with white-knuckled hands. The room felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. I had scrolled through every photo, every message, every damning detail over and over until they were seared into my mind. I couldn't believe the extent of it, the years of betrayal hidden behind the person I thought I knew. When Mia finally walked into the room, she was humming softly, already pulling her earrings off. She stopped mid-step when she saw me sitting there, her laptop open in front of me. Her face froze, and for a split second, I saw something flash in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. "What are you doing with my laptop?" she asked, her voice steady, but I could hear the undertone of panic. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned the screen toward her, the damning photos staring back at both of us. Her face drained of color, and she took a small step back, as though the images were something physical that could hurt her. "What is this?" she asked, though her voice wavered now. "You tell me," I said, my tone flat. She stood there for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Finally, she sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Alex, it's not what it looks like," she started, her voice soft, almost pleading. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound foreign in the stillness of the room. "Not what it looks like. Really, Mia? There are pictures. There are messages. Don't insult me by pretending this isn't exactly what it looks like." She flinched at my tone, her hands trembling now. "I can explain," she said, her voice breaking. "Then explain," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Explain why I've been sitting here looking at years of lies. Explain why I've been made to feel crazy every time I questioned your behavior. Explain why the woman I thought I married has been hiding this from me since before our wedding." Her silence was louder than any words she could have spoken. When she finally did speak, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her head bowed. "It just got out of control." "Out of control?" I repeated, disbelief lacing my voice. "Mia, this wasn't some one-time mistake. These messages go back years. Years. You've been lying to me for most of our marriage." Tears started streaming down her face, and she covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed. "I know I messed up, but I love you, Alex. I do. Please, we can fix this." Her words made me angrier than I thought possible. "You love me," I said, standing abruptly. "You love me, but you've been sneaking around behind my back for years? You love me, but you've been deleting conversations, hiding photos, and lying to my face every time I asked for the truth." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "Don't," I said firmly. "Don't touch me right now." The room was silent except for her muffled sobs. I stood there for a moment, watching the woman I thought I knew crumble in front of me. I wanted to feel something, anger, pity, love, but all I felt was empty. "I trusted you," I said finally, my voice quieter now but no less pained. "I trusted you with everything, Mia. And this is what you've been doing." She looked up at me then, her eyes red and swollen. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice barely audible. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please, Alex, don't give up on us." But her words felt hollow, like echoes bouncing off the walls. I couldn't stay there, couldn't listen to her try to piece together an excuse or a justification. Without another word, I turned and left the room, shutting the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. The house was too quiet, and my mind was too loud, replaying everything I'd seen and everything she'd said. The betrayal felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, and I couldn't see a way out from under it. The days after our confrontation were a blur. Mia and I barely spoke, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. She tried, in her own way, to reach out, leaving my favorite coffee on the counter in the mornings, texting me during the day to say she was thinking of me. But her efforts felt hollow, like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. I couldn't bring myself to respond. The images, the messages, the years of deception, they were burned into my mind, replaying every time I closed my eyes. One night, I heard her crying in the bedroom while I lay on the couch. Her sobs were quiet, muffled, but they still pierced through the walls like a knife. Part of me wanted to go to her, to comfort her, but I couldn't. The betrayal was too raw, the wound too fresh. Then, everything changed in an instant. It was a rainy Friday evening when it happened. Mia had gone out, saying she needed some air, and I didn't stop her. I was still stewing in my own emotions, thinking about what our next steps would be, if there even could be a next step. When my phone rang hours later, I wasn't prepared for the voice on the other end. It was a police officer, his tone professional but somber. "There had been an accident," he said. "Mia's car had collided with a truck on a slick highway. She didn't make it." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. My mind couldn't process them at first. One moment, she was alive, flawed and broken, but still here, and the next, she was gone. I drove to the hospital in a daze, the rain pounding against the windshield as if the universe itself was mourning. When I arrived, they let me see her. She was lying on a hospital bed, pale and lifeless, her hair still damp from the rain. I stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to think. My chest ached with a tangle of emotions I couldn't untangle. Grief, anger, guilt. I hadn't even begun to process the betrayal, and now I would never get the chance to confront it fully. The finality of her death left me with 1,000 unresolved questions, 1,000 emotions with no outlet. In the weeks after Mia's death, the house felt like a mausoleum. Her presence lingered everywhere, in the scent of her perfume on her pillow, in the shoes she'd kicked off by the door, in the half-empty coffee cup she'd left on the counter. I wanted to grieve her properly, to remember her as the woman I'd fallen in love with. But the betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud, making it impossible to reconcile the two versions of her. The loving wife I thought I knew and the woman who had lied to me for years. And then came the final blow. A month after her death, I went to the doctor for what I thought was a routine checkup. When the test results came back, the news hit me like another punch to the gut. I had contracted a venereal disease. The reality of what that meant crashed over me. The disease was a physical reminder of her betrayal, proof that her actions had reached deeper than I ever imagined. Fueled by a mix of anger and desperation, I decided to go through her devices one last time. I opened her phone, her laptop, every account I could access. The evidence was all there. Explicit messages, photos, videos. One message, from a college acquaintance, asked for photos from their last encounter, the casual tone making my stomach churn. The timestamps on some of the photos shocked me even more. There were images from years ago, back when we were engaged and Mia had short hair. She had been cheating on me for half of our marriage, hiding it behind her perfect facade. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life around, had been lying to me from the start. Mia's death left a void in many lives, but for her family, it was unbearable. They adored her. She was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Her parents were devastated, clinging to her memory as if it were the only thing keeping them afloat. Her sisters, Lila and Rachel, spoke about her in reverent tones, recounting all the ways she had touched their lives. I stood there at the funeral, surrounded by people who idolized her, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy their image of her. What good would it do to reveal the truth? To tell her grieving parents that the daughter they thought was perfect had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even put into words? No, I decided. Some truths were better left buried. I played the role of the heartbroken husband perfectly. I hugged her mother tightly when she cried on my shoulder, and I nodded along as her father talked about how much Mia had loved me. I even gave a eulogy, speaking about our marriage as though it had been untouched by the poison of her infidelity. It wasn't for her. It was for them. They didn't need to know the dark side of her life. Let them remember her as the loving daughter and sister they cherished. Let them have that version of her, even if it wasn't real. But keeping that secret wasn't easy. Every family dinner, every conversation about how wonderful she'd been, was a test of my self-control. I would sit there, nodding along, while my chest ached with the weight of everything I couldn't say. Lila, though, was different. She wasn't as effusive in her grief as the others. She seemed quieter, more reflective. At first, I thought it was just her way of processing the loss, but as time went on, I began to see her as someone who understood the complexity of grief in a way the others didn't. She was the only one who asked me, softly and without judgment, "How are you really holding up, Alex?" Her question caught me off guard. No one else had thought to ask. Not in a way that sounded like they genuinely wanted to know. I didn't answer her then, but that moment stuck with me. In the months following Mia's death, I drifted further from her family, but Lila became the exception. It started small, a quick text to check on me, an offer to drop off groceries or help with things around the house. At first, I thought it was just her way of coping, of staying busy in the aftermath of losing her sister. But over time, it became clear that it was more than that. She genuinely cared. One evening, she invited me over for coffee. Just to talk, she'd said, her voice gentle. I hesitated at first, not sure if I was ready to open up to anyone. But the loneliness I'd been carrying finally won out, and I found myself at her apartment, sitting across from her at the small kitchen table. We talked for hours, starting with Mia, sharing stories, memories, even some laughter. But as the night went on, the conversation turned deeper. She told me about her struggles with losing Mia, how she felt like she'd never really measured up to her older sister's seemingly perfect life. I always admired her, Lila said, staring into her coffee cup. But sometimes, it felt like I was living in her shadow. She was the one everyone looked up to. I nodded, understanding that feeling in a way I hadn't expected. She had a way of making everything look flawless, I said. But it wasn't always real. She glanced at me then, her eyes searching mine, but she didn't push for more. It was the first time I'd felt like I could breathe in months, like I didn't have to pretend everything was fine. That night marked a turning point. We started talking more often. Texts, calls, even meeting up for dinner occasionally. Lila had a calmness about her, a steadiness that felt like the opposite of everything Mia had been. She didn't try to fix me or pry too deeply. She just listened, offering quiet support when I needed it most. I didn't expect to feel a connection with her, but it grew slowly, naturally. She was a reminder that even in the midst of heartbreak, there could be moments of comfort and understanding. What started as casual companionship between Lila and me began to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. At first, I chalked it up to gratitude. She had been there for me in a way no one else had, listening without judgment, giving me space to process without pushing. But the more time we spent together, the more I realized that it wasn't just gratitude. I felt something deeper growing between us. I noticed the little things first. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she was passionate about, or how she laughed at even my weakest attempts at humor. She had this quiet confidence, a warmth that Mia had lacked in her final years. One evening, we were sitting on her couch after dinner, a movie playing in the background. We'd fallen into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. She turned to me suddenly, her expression thoughtful. "You seem lighter lately," she said. "Like you're finally starting to let go of some of the weight you've been carrying." Her words caught me off guard. "I guess I have been," I admitted. "But a lot of that's because of you." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm just glad I could help," she said softly. For a moment, I considered telling her everything. The truth about Mia, the lies, the betrayal. But I held back. It didn't feel like the right time, and I didn't want to burden her with the ugliness of it all. Still, that moment lingered in my mind. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a mutual recognition that something was shifting. It wasn't long before Mia's family started to notice the time Lila and I were spending together. Her mother, especially, was quick to make comments during family gatherings. "You two have gotten close," she said once, her tone sharp, her eyes narrowing as she glanced between us. I shrugged it off, not wanting to fan the flames, but the tension was palpable. Lila stayed quiet, her expression unreadable. Later that night, as we were leaving, Lila turned to me and said, "They're going to start asking questions. Are you ready for that?" Her honesty was one of the things I admired most about her, but it also made me nervous. I wasn't sure how to answer. All I knew was that being with her felt right in a way I hadn't expected. The whispers started soon after Mia's family noticed how much time Lila and I were spending together. At first, it was just side glances and lingering stares at family gatherings. Then came the questions, subtle at first but growing more pointed. "Alex, you've been spending a lot of time with Lila lately," Mia's mother said during a dinner at their house. Her tone was casual, but there was an edge to her words that made my stomach tighten. "She's been helping me out a lot," I replied carefully. "It's been nice to have someone to talk to." Her mother nodded, but the tension in her jaw was impossible to miss. Across the table, Rachel, Mia's other sister, shot me a look that was equal parts suspicion and disdain. Lila and I had been careful to keep things quiet, unsure of how her family would react. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to hide. I wasn't ashamed of how I felt about her, but the thought of explaining it to Mia's family, especially her mother, was daunting. The breaking point came at another family event a few weeks later. Mia's mother pulled me aside, her voice low but accusatory. "Alex, I know you're grieving, but don't you think this is inappropriate?" I didn't need to ask what she meant. "What's inappropriate about leaning on someone who understands what I've been through?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. "She's your wife's sister," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Lila appeared beside me, her expression calm but resolute. "Mom, stop," she said firmly. "This isn't your business." Her mother's face turned red, but she didn't say anything else. Instead, she turned and walked away, muttering under her breath. Later that evening, Lila and I sat in my car outside her apartment, the weight of the confrontation hanging heavy between us. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked quietly, her hands folded in her lap. I reached over and took her hand in mine. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know that being with you feels right. And that has to count for something." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. The tension with the family didn't end there. Rachel openly disapproved of our relationship, making snide comments whenever we were in the same room. But the hardest part was Mia's mother, who began to accuse me of tarnishing Mia's memory. "You're disrespecting her," she said one night after I stopped by to drop off some things for her. "How can you claim to have loved her and then move on so quickly? With her sister, no less." Her words cut deep, but I bit back my response. She didn't know the truth about Mia, and I wasn't sure she ever should. The tension with Mia's family was becoming unbearable. Every gathering felt like walking into a lion's den, with whispers, judgmental stares, and outright hostility from Rachel and Mia's mother. Even though Lila tried to shield me from it, I could see how much it weighed on her too. The only person who seemed neutral was Kyle, Mia's brother. He'd always been the most grounded member of the family, someone I respected and trusted. If anyone could understand what I was going through, it was him. One Saturday afternoon, I invited Kyle over to my house. He showed up with a six-pack of beer, his usual easygoing demeanor intact, but there was a curiosity in his eyes that told me he knew this wasn't just a casual hangout. After some small talk, I decided to rip off the bandage. "Kyle, there's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice steady but my heart racing. He raised an eyebrow, setting his beer down on the table. "This about you and Lila?" "Partly," I admitted. "But it's about Mia too." For the next hour, I told him everything. I started with the suspicions, the late nights, the guarded phone, the changes in her behavior. I told him about the hotel receipt, the hidden folder on her laptop, the messages, the photos. I even told him about the venereal disease, the final proof of her infidelity that I discovered after her death. Kyle didn't interrupt. He just listened, his expression growing more somber with every word. By the time I finished, his beer was untouched, and he was staring at the table, his jaw tight. "I had no idea," he said finally, his voice low. "Mia. She always seemed so put together. I can't believe she'd do that to you." I nodded, the weight of my confession lifting slightly. "I've kept it to myself because I didn't want to ruin how you all remember her. Your parents, Rachel, they don't need to know this. But it's been killing me, Kyle. Carrying it alone." Kyle leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I get why you kept it quiet. And you're right. Mom and Rachel couldn't handle it. But I'm glad you told me." He paused, his gaze steady. "And for what it's worth, I think you and Lila are doing nothing wrong. Mia made her choices. Alex, you don't owe her anything more." Hearing Kyle say those words felt like a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. "I'll talk to them," Kyle added. "Mom, Rachel, they need to back off. If you and Lila make each other happy, that's all that matters." I nodded, grateful for his support. When Kyle left, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. Knowing he was on my side made the judgment from Mia's mother and Rachel easier to bear. For the first time, I began to feel like there was a way forward, not just for me, but for Lila and me together. After confiding in Kyle, things began to shift, though not immediately. He kept his promise, speaking with Mia's mother and Rachel to try and ease the tension surrounding my relationship with Lila. But while Kyle's support was unwavering, not everyone in the family was as understanding. Mia's mother, in particular, refused to let it go. At the next family gathering, she pulled me aside, her tone sharp and accusing. "Kyle told me everything," she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "He told me what Mia did to you. But Alex, I don't understand how you could move on so quickly, with her sister no less." I took a deep breath, steadying myself before responding. It's not about moving on quickly, I said. It's about finding someone who understands me, someone who makes me happy. Lila has been there for me in a way Mia never was. Her face twisted in a mixture of anger and hurt. But Mia's gone. Whatever mistakes she made, she's not here to defend herself. You've tarnished her memory by doing this. I felt a surge of frustration but kept my voice calm. I've protected Mia's memory, more than you realize. I've kept quiet about things that could have destroyed the way you see her. But I won't apologize for finding comfort in someone who's been kind to me when I needed it most. She stared at me for a long moment before shaking her head and walking away. Rachel wasn't any easier to deal with. She avoided me and Lila at gatherings, her disapproval obvious in every glance and every curt response. One evening, as Lila and I were leaving a dinner at Mia's parents' house, Rachel cornered her outside. "I can't believe you do this," Rachel said, her voice low but seething with anger. "How could you betray Mia like this? She was your sister." Lila didn't back down. "This isn't about betrayal, Rachel. It's about love. I cared about Mia, but that doesn't mean I'm not allowed to live my own life. She's barely been gone 2 years, Rachel spat. And you're already playing house with her husband? It's disgusting." Before Lila could respond, I stepped in. "That's enough, Rachel," I said firmly. "You don't get to dictate how we handle our grief or our lives. You don't know the whole story." She shot me a withering look before storming off, but I could see the pain behind her anger. I didn't blame her for struggling with the situation. It wasn't easy for any of us. But her judgment only added to the weight Lila and I were already carrying. Despite the tension, Lila and I began to grow closer than ever. She became my safe haven, the person who grounded me when everything else felt chaotic. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I took her hand in mine. "I don't know what the future looks like," I said honestly. "But I know I want you to be part of it." She smiled, her eyes soft and filled with emotion. "I feel the same way," she said quietly. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough. In that moment, I realized that as long as we had each other, we could face whatever came next. Lila and I tried our best to focus on each other and block out the noise from Mia's family. It wasn't easy, but we found comfort in the quiet moments we shared. Cooking dinner together, walking through the park, even just sitting side by side in silence. For the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Mia's betrayal: peace. It wasn't that I didn't think about Mia anymore. Her memory lingered in unexpected places: an old photo on the fridge, a song that played on the radio, the faint scent of her perfume on a scarf I found while cleaning out the closet. But those moments didn't cut as deeply as they once had. Lila was a big part of that. Her presence didn't erase the pain of the past, but it made it easier to bear. She didn't try to fix me or force me to move on faster than I was ready. She just loved me, quietly and unconditionally. When we decided to officially start our life together, we knew it wouldn't be without challenges. Telling Mia's parents about our engagement was one of the hardest things we'd ever done. We went to her parents' house on a quiet Sunday afternoon, knowing they deserved to hear the news from us directly. Her mother greeted us stiffly, her eyes darting between Lila and me as though bracing for something unpleasant. After some small talk, I took a deep breath and said, "We wanted to tell you something important. Lila and I are engaged." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father looked down at his hands, his expression unreadable. Her mother, on the other hand, was anything but silent. "Engaged," she repeated, her voice rising. "You're engaged to my daughter's husband? Are you out of your mind?" "Mom, please," Lila said, her tone pleading. "No," her mother snapped, her face flushed with anger. "This is wrong. Mia hasn't even been gone 2 years, and you're already trying to replace her? How dare you do this? To her, to me, to this family." Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. "Mom, this isn't about replacing Mia. It's about moving forward. Alex and I have been through so much, and we make each other happy. Doesn't that matter to you?" Her mother shook her head, refusing to look at either of us. "You've both made your choices. But don't expect me to accept them." Her words stung, but they didn't surprise me. I had prepared for this reaction, but seeing the hurt on Lila's face was harder than anything I'd expected. After that day, Lila and I made the decision to distance ourselves from Mia's mother and Rachel. It wasn't out of spite, it was about protecting our happiness. We couldn't keep trying to win approval from people who weren't willing to give it. Kyle, however, remained a steadfast ally. He called us regularly, checking in and offering his support. "You can't change how Mom or Rachel feel," he told me one evening over a beer. "But that doesn't mean what you and Lila have is wrong. Don't let them take that from you." His words stuck with me, giving me the courage to keep moving forward. Lila and I began planning a small, intimate wedding, something simple and meaningful. We didn't want the drama of inviting people who couldn't celebrate our happiness, so we kept the guest list small: close friends, a few family members, and Kyle. The process wasn't without its moments of sadness. As I sat with Lila, going over the details of the ceremony, I couldn't help but think about how different this was from the life I'd envisioned with Mia. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. Instead, they reminded me of how far I'd come, and how grateful I was to have found love again, even in the most unexpected place. The day of our wedding was quiet and beautiful, exactly what Lila and I had envisioned. We exchanged vows in a small garden surrounded by the few people who truly supported us: Kyle, a handful of friends, and my parents. It wasn't the grand affair my first wedding to Mia had been, but it felt more genuine, more honest. As I stood there, holding Lila's hands and looking into her eyes, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. She wasn't just my partner, she was my sanctuary, my reminder that love could survive even the deepest wounds. The months that followed were filled with small, joyful milestones. We moved into a new house together, one that didn't carry the weight of old memories. It was a fresh start, a chance to build something that was entirely ours. Mia's mother and Rachel remained distant, their disapproval lingering in the background like an unwelcome shadow. There were times when their absence hurt, when I wished things could have been different, but I knew that Lila and I couldn't carry the burden of their judgment forever. Kyle, as always, remained a steady presence. He and I would often go fishing or grab beers at a local bar, moments of normalcy that reminded me of the simpler, easier parts of life. He never brought up Mia unless I did, and for that, I was grateful. Every now and then, I'd find myself thinking about Mia. Her betrayal still stung when I allowed myself to dwell on it, but those moments became fewer and farther between. I had learned to compartmentalize, to acknowledge the pain without letting it consume me. One day, while unpacking a box of old belongings, I came across a photo of Mia and me from our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach, our arms wrapped around each other, laughing like nothing in the world could touch us. I stared at the photo for a long time, the emotions it stirred surprising me. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet sadness for the life we'd once imagined but never truly had. I tucked the photo back into the box and placed it on a high shelf. It wasn't something I needed to look at every day, but it wasn't something I was ready to throw away either. Lila and I eventually began talking about starting a family. It was a conversation filled with hope and possibility, a stark contrast to the years I'd spent in doubt and heartache. "I think we'd make great parents," she said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I think so too," I replied, smiling at her. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Mia's betrayal had shaped me in ways I hadn't expected. It taught me how fragile trust could be and how much strength it took to rebuild after everything falls apart. But it also taught me something else, something I hadn't understood until I found Lila. Love, when it's real, isn't about perfection. It's about honesty, resilience, and the willingness to face life's messiness together. With Lila, I had found that love. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free.